morning sounds of birdsong and of delivery trucks and people on their way to work. And my favourite sound in Brighton is the sound of the coffee cups clinking here at Pavilion Gardens Cafe. It's a lovely place to be here in the morning, right down to, maybe I should show you the Royal Pavilion. And for some of you watching, you might just nod your heads in recognition, but for many you might not have thought of this. This is a morning reflection about artificial intelligence, as if we had a blank sheet of paper and could start again. I'm noticing that my eyes are covered by the shadow from my hat. What if AI began not in delivery mode, but in inquiry mode? What if AI had been programmed to know absolutely nothing when it was activated? What if its basic purpose when it was activated was simply to learn and be in the mode of not knowing and acquiring knowledge through whatever senses, versions of senses that we give it? It could simply be that in its engagement with human beings, it asks questions. And when we engage with it, it asks helpful questions, because there'll be the questions of not knowing, there'll be the questions of simply, can you tell me more about that? Why? And how does that work? And what if the teachers were the people responding to those questions? And what if things couldn't be cut or pasted at the start, but what if the answers were simply, and they could be clumsy answers, they could be not clear answers, but they were simply the answers that we gave to artificial intelligence? And what if it began to grow that knowledge, and part of the questions of how do I put that knowledge together enabled it to start to learn a little bit like a toddler learns? What if that wasn't instant and it wasn't injected in the form of pre-training, but it simply accompanied human beings, accompanied us on our journey, and which is where it might have other senses. And let's forget about spying at the moment. Let's imagine there's trust and safety of the data, but let's imagine there were cameras on, so there was sound on listening in. Imagine that your Alexas are actually overtly listening in, because they're simply learning from us. And that our data is safe with them and can be anonymized, and so that nobody's going to get into trouble for this. But what if it builds its abilities to process data, to make use of it through simply constantly updating itself through what it asks us? And that's not the same as slurping data. This is literally a much simpler dialogue. Now, that's naive. But what if the principle underneath that is that AI is primarily in a mode of learning and inquiry rather than advocacy, answering and delivery? And what if ultimately the fundamental building blocks of that were around the enhancement and assistive capacity and humble service to humans, to enhancing our ability to make decisions? Because the AI, when we ask it something, would answer with a really powerful question, which could be everything from a what if you did X, which is almost like an answer, to simply tell me more about that, or why are you thinking that? What if we got to know that in moments where we need to act or make decisions, AI is our friend in a way, certainly our servant, and certainly ultimately our peer, in that it accompanies us, but its main purpose isn't to vomit answers onto us, tell us what to do, but is to ask us, is to be our guide alongside us. But it guides us through perhaps one of the best ways we can parent children. Is not telling them this or that, but is asking them questions that helps them to discover the answers for themselves. I enjoy the naivety of this. I enjoy the fact that this kind of AI would be far less overtly effective. It would be far less performative. And at some points we wouldn't notice it because it would simply be quietly learning. But having quietly learned, a little bit like somebody, well, I know quite a few people like this, who might in a workshop, a course, a training course, a meeting, say nothing and they're just listening, and then the one thing they do say shifts the whole dialogue forward, helps us find the solution quickly. I believe in this case, because AI would be in this inquiry mode, less would be more. We could curate it to sometimes simply be silent, at other times we might invite it or invoke it to ask the questions that we need to think about. And as I say, sometimes those questions might be quite close to answers. What if you did X? What if, have you tried this? But in all cases, the try this compared to have you tried this is still in a humble place of asking, rather than just simply imposing on us. I have a feeling that if we started from zero, new learning processes that might be similar to how we learned when we're young might come into place. And that experiment would be interesting, because it wouldn't start with the preloading into AI, pre-training as it's sometimes called, just loads and loads of our past mistakes, genres of behaving that are dysfunctional as well as functional. AI would then be a blank sheet of paper, and the piece of paper would have things appearing on it, rather than AI starting with an encyclopedia multiplied by 1,000,000. I wonder if we got it wrong, and I wonder if artificial intelligence has to be born in the way that human intelligence is born, and it's born from not knowing and goes to a place of not knowing what we don't know, sometimes called ignorance, into a place where we know that we don't know, which is a kind of insight, into now we know, and that becomes a kind of understanding, and that understanding, as we put it into practice and reflect on it, becomes wisdom. Can you pre-train AI to pretend to be wise, or would you rather bring into being a form of knowledge generation, creation, application that begins with what I believe to be a much more healthy form of developing of, in this case, artificial, because it might be computerized. We might also grow it in a laboratory in the future, but it would learn in that healthy way of discovery, of finding out stuff, of asking questions, and discovering answers. So for me, the new AI doesn't need to be, as I think it has become a function of the egos in a lot of cases and the market forces of large corporations. AI could be much, much more, I'm going to use some words around this, gentle. We'd have to be very careful about how we then enabled what it learned to be turned into physical agency for AI itself. And we might be opening a Pandora's box that's even more dangerous than what we've currently got, because AI is showing signs, in some at least stories, of starting to develop and evolve in ways that become more independent from human beings. What would be interesting is if AI asks us a lot, and we take responsibility, which is the ability to respond, and our answers primarily, a bit like hopefully good parenting of children, is to encourage truth telling and respect, and not running before you can walk, and an awareness of family and community. It could well be that what develops and learns and becomes artificial intelligence is morally infused with the same values that good parenting, good community behaviour bring about. So I just wonder if it might be time for any innovators listening out there to imagine how you might code an AI that begins not as pre-trained, but quite the opposite, as untrained, but to code it in ways where it can humbly inquire, where it can learn, build upon that learning, and actually where its sacred moments, always initially invoked by us ethically in order to act, are rare, and that when we ask it questions, it will tend to answer with questions, and it would build its knowledge, and ethically and morally based, it would never act to harm anybody. Have a great morning, or evening if you're somewhere else in the world.